The alien warrior hurled a javelin at him, but he caught it. Now, by ancient law, she as his forever Elliot stood at the edge of the arena, his heart beating steadily in his chest. He was an explorer, a traveler from Earth, far from home on a distant planet. He had been chosen, like so many others before him, to participate in a grand tournament that gathered warriors from across the galaxy. The arena was massive, surrounded by towering stone walls, and the ground beneath his boots was made of sand and dust, worn smooth by years of battles. He was no stranger to danger. Over the years, Elliot had been in countless fights, both physical and mental, but this was different. The tournament was legendary, known for its brutal challenges and the fearsome competitors it attracted. His opponent in the first round was someone no one would dare underestimate. Her name was Serena. She was a Tharokian, a species known for their ancient warrior code and unmatched strength. Her eyes were sharp like a predator's, her posture regal, and her muscles rippled under her armor as she strode into the arena. She had never been defeated, and no one expected that she would lose today. The crowd roared in anticipation, their voices rising like the wind before a storm. Serena was a living legend, and facing her was a death sentence for most. But Elliot wasn't like most people. He had fought in wars, navigated through dangerous space anomalies, and escaped from the clutches of ruthless enemies. He wasn't afraid, but the challenge ahead would push him to his limits. The horn sounded and the battle began. Serena wasted no time. She charged forward, her massive spear glinting in the sunlight as she swung it with terrifying precision. Elliot ducked, his movements quick and fluid. He was smaller than Serena, but he was nimble, and that was his advantage. He dodged her strikes, circling around her, looking for an opening. Serena swung again, but this time Elliot was ready. He dropped to the ground, avoiding her blow by mere inches, and rolled to his feet in one smooth motion. The crowd gasped in awe, watching as the human managed to evade the alien warrior's attacks. Serena's eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to this. No one had ever been fast enough to evade her strikes for this long. Her pride was at stake, and she couldn't afford to be shown up by a mere human. With a growl, she adjusted her stance and prepared for her next move. Elliot saw his chance. He darted to the side, aiming to distract her just long enough to get behind her. He wasn't trying to win this fight through brute force. Instead, he focused on strategy, on finding weaknesses. Serena was strong, but her arrogance had made her predictable. Elliot wasn't going to beat her with strength. He would beat her with his mind. The crowd watched in silence as Elliot and Serena moved like two dancers, each one testing the other. Then, in a move that shocked everyone, Serena suddenly tossed her spear high into the air, aiming for Elliot's heart. It was a perfect shot. The javelin flew through the air with incredible speed, its sharp tip glinting in the sunlight. Elliot had only moments to react. His hand shot out instinctively. He wasn't sure why or how, but his fingers closed around the shaft of the javelin with a force that felt unnatural. The weapon, intended to end his life, came to an abrupt halt in midair as Elliot gripped it with both hands. He stared at the javelin, his heart pounding before slowly bringing it down to his side. The arena was deathly silent. No one had ever done what Elliot had just done. The crowd was in disbelief, their eyes wide, trying to process what had just occurred. Serena, who had thrown the weapon with full force, stood frozen, her mouth slightly open in shock. For a long moment, nothing moved. Elliot looked at the javelin in his hands, then slowly turned his gaze to Serena. He had caught her weapon, something that no one had ever done before. He wasn't just standing there alive. He had defied the expectations of every alien in the arena, from the judges to the spectators. And Serena knew it. The ancient warrior code was clear. Anyone who caught the weapon of a Tharokian in midair, with no aid from technology or trickery, was bound by law to the warrior who threw it. It was a law as old as the Tharokian people themselves. The one who caught the javelin would gain the respect and loyalty of the warrior who had thrown it. For the act of catching it was considered a great honor. Serena's pride flared up inside her. She was a warrior, strong and proud. She had been victorious for centuries, and no one had ever bested her in battle. But here in this arena, this human, this earthling, had done what no one had thought possible. And now, by the ancient law, Serena was his. The bond was formed in an instant. The moment the javelin was caught, Serena's fate had been sealed. She was no longer just the undefeated champion. She was bound to the human who stood before her. He had won not with strength, but with sheer audacity and skill. The silence that filled the arena was broken by a single voice, one that came from deep within Serena herself. She had no choice but to speak the words that had been spoken by all Tharokian warriors before her. "By the law of the Tharokians," she said, her voice carrying across the arena, "I am bound to you." The crowd gasped, some in awe, others in shock. Elliot stood still, unsure of what to say. He hadn't wanted this. He didn't want to control anyone, especially not someone as powerful as Serena. But the law was clear. He had caught her weapon, and now, by all the ancient rules, she belonged to him. Serena's eyes softened as she looked at him, the weight of the bond settling on her shoulders. She had never imagined that a human, someone so different from her, would ever be the one to catch her javelin. But now there was no turning back. The law had spoken, and she was his forever. The tournament's judges, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Their voices were filled with both reverence and uncertainty. No one had ever seen a human in such a position before. This wasn't just a victory in a game, it was the beginning of something much greater. The announcer's voice rang out, acknowledging the incredible turn of events. The human Elliot has proven himself worthy in the eyes of the Tharokian code. He is now bound to Serena, the undefeated warrior. The crowd erupted into applause, but for Elliot it felt hollow. He had won, yes, but at what cost? Serena's fate was now in his hands. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. His life would never be the same again. And as he looked at Serena, who stood before him, the weight of the ancient law settling on both of them, he realized that this was just the beginning of a journey neither of them had ever expected. A journey that would change the galaxy forever. Elliot stood there in the center of the arena, his grip still tight around the javelin. The silence felt heavier than any weight he had ever known. He looked around, not sure how to respond, not sure what to do next. The entire crowd was staring at him, waiting for something, anything. He felt as though the eyes of the entire galaxy were upon him, expecting him to speak, to act, to say something. His mind raced. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't asked for a binding law to change the course of his life. He hadn't asked for Serena, the undefeated warrior, to be forced into a bond with him that neither of them had prepared for. What did this mean for him? What did it mean for her? Serena, the mighty Tharokian, stood still before him, her pride hanging by a thread. Her chest heaved with every breath, but her face remained cold, like a mask that hid the whirlwind of thoughts inside her. She was a warrior, proud and fierce. The law of her people demanded that she obey, but her pride had never been so wounded. This human, this strange, fragile being had caught her weapon, a symbol of her strength, and now she was bound to him by an ancient code that had been in place long before she was born. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the crowd's murmurs faded into the background. The arena felt small, confined, as though the walls were closing in on Elliot and Serena. Finally, Serena's voice broke the silence. It was low, quiet, and filled with a strange mix of frustration and curiosity. "You do not understand what this means," she said, her eyes meeting his. "You caught my javelin. By the ancient law, I am yours, but I am no servant, no pet. I am a warrior. You must understand the weight of what you now carry." Elliot swallowed hard. He nodded slowly, unsure of how to express the confusion he felt. "I don't want to control you," he said, his voice steady but uncertain. "I don't want to command you. You cannot undo this," Serena interrupted, her voice sharp. "You have already proven your strength. You have already taken what is mine." She looked down at the javelin in his hand, the very weapon that had once defined her. Elliot's heart raced. He had only wanted to survive, to make it through this tournament, to prove that he was worthy of the galaxy's respect. But this was something entirely different. This was beyond combat. This was about a bond, a connection that had been forged without his consent. "I didn't ask for this," he said, his voice quiet, almost to himself. Serena regarded him with an unreadable expression. "No, but you have it now." For a few moments they both stood in silence, neither knowing what to do next. The tournament officials had remained in the background, watching with their arms crossed, giving Elliot and Serena the space to figure out what came next. The rules were clear. The javelin had been caught. Serena was now bound to Elliot, and no one could change that. As the minutes passed, the crowd began to stir again, their whispers growing louder. The announcer's voice rang out across the arena, breaking the tension. "By the laws of the Tharokians, the human Elliot has claimed victory over Serena." She is bound to him as the ancient code demands. The words echoed in Elliot's ears, the weight of them sinking deep into his chest. He couldn't deny it. The bond was real and there was no escape from it. Serena was his, whether he liked it or not. But the confusion didn't end there. What did this bond mean for them? What did it mean for their futures? "I did not expect this," Elliot said, looking at Serena, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." Serena's expression softened slightly. It was the first time Elliot had seen her show any sign of vulnerability, and it caught him off guard. "You are not the only one confused," she replied, her voice quieter now. "But the law is the law, and I am bound to you whether I like it or not." Elliot looked at her, the realization of their situation sinking in. They were both trapped in this strange bond, forced together by a code neither of them had chosen. He wasn't sure what this meant for him, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let Serena become his enemy. He had to find a way to make this work. "I'm not going to force you to do anything," Elliot said firmly. "But if we're going to do this, we need to understand each other. We need to figure out what this bond really means and how we can survive it." Serena met his gaze, her eyes still filled with a mix of defiance and curiosity. "I will follow you, human. But do not mistake my obedience for submission. I will serve you as the law requires, but I will never be your servant." Elliot nodded. He understood that. This wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't asking her to be his servant, and he didn't want her to feel that way. He wanted something different, something more. He wanted a partnership, something that went beyond the laws of the galaxy. But that was something they would have to build together. As the tournament came to a close, Elliot and Serena walked out of the arena side by side, the weight of their bond hanging in the air between them. The crowd had dispersed, but the echoes of their victory still rang in Elliot's ears. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they would face it together. The galaxy might not understand what had just happened, but Elliot and Serena would have to find their way through it. And they would have to do it as partners, bound by an ancient law neither of them could change. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be struggles, battles, and moments of doubt. But for now, they had each other. And that, in the end, was enough. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. Elliot and Serena found themselves traveling together, not knowing exactly where they were headed. The bond that had formed between them was still new and unfamiliar. Neither of them had the answers, but they both knew that they couldn't turn back. They were bound by a law older than either of them, a law that had changed the course of their lives in a single moment. They traveled across planets, moving through cities and forests, crossing deserts and oceans. Everywhere they went, people stared at them. The sight of a human walking side by side with a Tharokian warrior was something that few had ever seen. In many ways, they were a curiosity, something that people talked about behind their backs. But they paid it no mind. They had enough to deal with between them. At first, their journey was awkward. Elliot tried to respect Serena's strength and her need for independence, but he also knew that she was bound to him. She had to follow his lead. Yet every time they camped together at night, the silence between them grew. Serena was always distant, her thoughts hidden behind the mask of her warrior nature. She rarely spoke unless she had to, and when she did, her words were brief and curt. Elliot didn't mind. He understood that she was still struggling with the bond, still grappling with what it meant for her pride. But he couldn't help but feel a distance between them, a gulf that seemed impossible to bridge. He wanted to understand her, to get past the walls she had built around herself. But each time he tried to talk, she would close herself off again, retreating into her thoughts. One evening, as they sat by a fire, Elliot finally spoke. "Serena, I know you're not happy about this," he said quietly. "I get it. I never wanted to force you into something you didn't choose, but we're in this together now, and I want to understand what that means. What do you want from me? What do you need?" Serena looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a long time, she didn't answer. The flames crackled in the background, casting long shadows on the ground. The firelight danced across her face, making her look even more fierce and beautiful. But there was something else in her eyes now, a flicker of something that Elliot hadn't seen before. "I need nothing from you," she finally said, her voice soft but firm. "I do not want to be tied to you by law, but I am, and now that I am, I will honor it. I will follow you as the law demands, but do not mistake that for submission. I am not your servant." Elliot nodded, his heart sinking a little. He had never wanted her to feel like a servant. He respected her too much for that. but the weight of the bond was heavy, and it was hard to know how to balance it. How could he offer her the respect she deserved while also accepting that she was bound to him? "I don't see you as a servant," he said. "I see you as a partner. We're in this together whether we like it or not. I want to find a way for us both to get through this. I don't want you to feel like you have no choice." Serena's eyes softened just slightly. For a moment it seemed like she was going to say something, but then she turned her gaze back to the fire. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "we can find a way, but it will not be easy. The bond is more than just the law. It is a part of who I am. My people are bound by it, and I am bound to it as much as you are." Elliot didn't respond right away. He just watched her, trying to understand her better. There was so much about her that he didn't know, so much that she had yet to share. But he had to be patient. He had to let her open up in her own time. The next few days were much like the first. They traveled through rugged terrain, encountering strange creatures and dangerous landscapes. Along the way, they came across a group of travelers, an eclectic mix of species, all making their way across the galaxy. Some were traders, others were bounty hunters, and a few were simply wanderers like them. They exchanged goods and stories, shared food around campfires, and passed through the same towns and cities. But through it all, Elliot and Serena stayed together, a pair unlike any other. Serena, despite her reluctance, began to open up in small ways. She would share bits of her past, stories of battles she had fought, of victories and losses. She spoke of her homeland, the Tharokian culture, and the deep traditions of her people. For the first time, Elliot began to see her not just as a warrior, but as someone who had her own dreams, fears, and hopes. He saw the vulnerability that she tried so hard to hide, and he felt a deep respect for her. One night, after a long day of travel, they sat on a cliffside, looking out over a valley bathed in moonlight. The stars were bright above them, and the air was cool and still. Serena sat beside him, her posture as proud as ever, but there was a softness in her eyes that wasn't there before. "I never expected this," Serena said, her voice almost a whisper. "I never expected to be bound to anyone, especially not a human. My people believe in strength and honor. They believe in standing alone. But now I am bound to you, and I do not know what to make of it." Elliot turned to her, his heart heavy with understanding. "I didn't ask for this either," he said. "I never wanted to control you. I never wanted to change your life, but now that we're here, we have to figure it out, together." Serena met his gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Perhaps," she said softly, "we can learn from each other. Maybe this bond is not as terrible as I thought, but only time will tell." Elliot smiled faintly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For the first time since the tournament, he felt a small sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out. Maybe they could find a way to be more than just the human and the Tharokian warrior bound by ancient law. Maybe they could become something stronger. As the night wore on, they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The stars above them seemed to shine brighter, as if the universe itself was watching them, waiting to see how this strange and unexpected partnership would unfold. The road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with challenges neither of them could predict. But for now, they had each other. And that was enough. Days turned into weeks as Elliot and Serena continued their journey across the galaxy. They had faced many challenges, from treacherous terrain to unexpected encounters with dangerous creatures. But despite the difficulties, they had formed a routine, a strange, quiet partnership that neither of them had expected. They traveled together, slept under the same stars, and fought side by side when danger came their way. Over time, their bond began to feel less like a curse and more like a strange kind of understanding. They were still figuring it out, still learning about each other. But the connection between them was growing, though neither of them would admit it out loud. One evening, as they camped near the edge of a dense forest, Elliot sat by the fire, staring into the flames. The crackling sound of the burning wood filled the silence between them. Serena had been unusually quiet that day, and Elliot couldn't help but notice her distant expression. She had always been strong and independent, but lately there was something different in her eyes. She seemed lost in thought, as though she were grappling with something deep inside. Elliot hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to break the silence. But then he spoke. "Serena," he said softly, "what's on your mind?" Serena didn't answer right away. She was sitting on the ground a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest. She looked up at the sky, her eyes scanning the stars above them. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "You don't understand," she said. "This bond, it's more than just a law. It's a part of who I am, of what I am. I was raised to believe that my strength was all that mattered, that I was nothing without it. And now I am bound to you, a human, a being that my people have always looked down on. How am I supposed to reconcile that?" Elliot felt the weight of her words. He had never fully understood the burden she carried, the weight of her culture and her people's expectations. But he was beginning to see it now, to understand the conflict she faced every day. She had been raised to be a warrior, to stand alone, to never rely on anyone. And now she was bound to him by an ancient law, a law that had taken away her freedom. "I can't imagine what that must feel like," Elliot said gently. "But I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm not asking you to give up your strength or your independence. I want us to figure this out together. I don't want you to feel like you're trapped." Serena's eyes softened as she looked at him, though there was still a guarded expression on her face. "You think it's that simple, that we can just figure it out? This bond, it's not something that can be easily understood. It's a part of me, of my people's history. I can't just forget it." Elliot nodded, understanding. "I know it's not simple, but we don't have to do this alone. We're in this together, for better or for worse, and we'll face whatever comes next as partners, not as master and servant, but as equals." Serena stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a quiet sigh, she looked away. "I don't know if I can believe that yet," she admitted, "but maybe I can try." The fire crackled between them, and for the first time in days, Elliot felt a small sense of hope. They were still far from figuring everything out, but this moment, this quiet exchange, felt like a small step forward. Later that night, as they settled into their respective sleeping places, the silence between them was less heavy. They didn't speak much, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They were learning to trust each other, little by little. The next morning, they continued their journey, crossing a vast, barren plain under the scorching sun. The landscape was desolate, with nothing but dust and rocky outcrops as far as the eye could see. They had been walking for hours when they noticed a small group of figures approaching in the distance. Elliot squinted against the sun, trying to make out who they were. As they drew closer, he saw that the group was made up of several armed individuals, all wearing the uniform of the Galactic Council, an organization that had long been a source of tension in the galaxy. The Council was known for its strict control over the various planets and species, and their presence often meant trouble. Serena immediately tensed beside him, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Elliot could feel her body language shift, the warrior within her awakening. He knew that she didn't trust the Council, and neither did he. The group of Council officers stopped a few yards away, their leader, a tall, imposing figure with dark eyes, stepping forward. "We've been following you," the leader said, his voice low and cold. "You're the one they're calling the human warrior. You've made quite a name for yourself." Elliot stood tall, trying to remain calm despite the growing tension. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice steady. The leader's gaze shifted to Serena, lingering on her for a moment before turning back to Elliot. "You've got the Tharokian warrior by your side. Do you know what kind of trouble that brings? You're not just a human anymore. You're a symbol of something far bigger than you can imagine." Serena's eyes flashed with anger. "I am not your symbol," she spat. "I am no one's tool." The leader ignored her, his eyes narrowing as he focused on Elliot. "You've broken the natural order. Tharokians do not bond with humans. You've crossed a line, and the Council doesn't take kindly to disruptions in the balance of power." Elliot's heart sank as he realized the danger they were in. The Council had no tolerance for anything that threatened their control, and the bond between him and Serena, something that had seemed so small to them, was now a problem in their eyes. "We're not looking for trouble," Elliot said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We're just passing through." The leader smirked, a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "That's not how it works. You've caught the attention of those more powerful than you, human, and you'll answer for it." With a swift motion, the leader signaled to his men, who immediately raised their weapons, aiming them at Elliot and Serena. The situation was quickly escalating, and Elliot's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't going to end without a fight. Serena stepped forward, her hand now firmly gripping the sword at her side. "If it's a fight you want, then you'll get one," she said, her voice laced with defiance. Elliot's eyes widened as he realized the gravity of the situation. The council was more dangerous than he had thought, and they weren't just going to let them walk away. The tension between the two groups was palpable, and Elliot knew that they were facing something much larger than just an ordinary fight. This was the beginning of something that neither of them had expected, and the future was uncertain. But one thing was clear. They were in this together, no matter what came next. The tension in the air was thick as the council's soldiers aimed their weapons at Elliot and Serena. Elliot felt the weight of the situation, his mind racing with possible outcomes. They were outnumbered and the council's soldiers were well-equipped and trained. But he wasn't about to back down. Not now, not when they had come this far. Serena stood beside him, her posture tense and ready. Her hand hovered near the sword at her side, her muscles coiled like a spring, ready to fight. She was no stranger to battle, but even she could see the danger they were in. These weren't just ordinary soldiers. These were the council's elite. They were ruthless and they wouldn't hesitate to take them down. The leader of the council soldiers took a step forward, his eyes locked onto Elliot. "You've made a mistake, human," he said, his voice cold and unwavering. "You've crossed paths with the wrong people. The Galactic Council does not tolerate acts of defiance, especially not from someone like you." Elliot met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not afraid of anything you can throw at me, but if you want to fight, you're going to have to go through her first." He gestured toward Serena, and the soldiers shifted uneasily. They had heard of the Tharokians, of course. Everyone had. The warriors were legendary, known for their strength and their deadly combat skills. But that didn't stop them from underestimating the humans standing in front of them. They had no idea what they were up against. The leader's eyes narrowed, a look of disdain crossing his face. "I don't need to fight her," he said with a sneer. "I just need to make an example out of you." He raised his hand, and before Elliot could react, the soldiers fired. Everything happened in an instant. The sound of blaster fire filled the air, followed by the screech of energy blasts cutting through the silence. Serena was already in motion, her sword drawn and ready. She moved with the speed and precision of a predator, blocking the shots aimed at them and returning fire with her own. Elliot dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding a burst of energy that flew past him. His heart raced, adrenaline pumping through his veins as he scrambled to his feet. He wasn't a trained warrior like Serena, but he had learned a thing or two in his time exploring the galaxy. He grabbed a nearby rock and hurled it toward one of the soldiers, knocking the weapon from their hands. The soldiers hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by Elliot's quick thinking. But that hesitation was enough for Serena to close the distance. She swung her sword with deadly accuracy, taking down two soldiers in one swift motion. Their weapons clattered to the ground, and the others scrambled to regroup. The leader of the soldiers barked orders, signaling for his men to advance. "You think you can defeat us?" he spat. "The council has more resources than you can imagine. This will end now." But Elliot and Serena weren't about to let that happen. They fought side by side, moving in perfect harmony despite the chaos around them. Serena's sword cut through the air like a blade of lightning, and Elliot used his agility to stay one step ahead of their attackers. They were a team, whether they liked it or not. Serena moved with an almost unnatural grace, her body flowing with each strike as she took down soldier after soldier. Elliot darted in and out of the fray, using every inch of his surroundings to his advantage. The fire from the soldiers' weapons lit up the battlefield, but neither of them showed any sign of fear. They were determined to survive. The leader of the soldiers continued to issue orders, but his voice was starting to crack. He could see the tide turning, the soldiers losing ground with every passing second. Elliot and Serena were relentless, their bond growing stronger with every battle. Finally, the leader took a step back, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had underestimated them, underestimated Elliot. He had thought this would be easy, that the human would be nothing more than a footnote in the council's grand scheme. But Elliot had proven him wrong. He had shown the council that they weren't invincible, that there were forces out there willing to stand against them. With a final, defiant roar, the leader raised his weapon and charged toward Elliot, intending to end it all in one final strike. But Serena was faster. She moved like a shadow, intercepting the leader's attack with a force that sent him sprawling to the ground. Her sword hovered above him, the tip just inches from his throat. "Enough!" Serena said coldly. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. You've lost. The leader looked up at her, fear flickering in his eyes. He knew he was beaten. The soldiers who had been with him were either unconscious or retreating, realizing they were no match for the combined strength of Elliot and Serena. Serena turned to Elliot, her eyes meeting his. For the first time since they had met, she gave him a small nod of approval. They had won. They had taken down the council's soldiers, and they had done it together. Elliot's heart was still racing, but there was a sense of satisfaction in the air. They had survived. They had proven that they could stand against the most powerful forces in the galaxy. But as he looked around at the fallen soldiers, he knew this wasn't the end. The Galactic Council wouldn't just let them go. This was only the beginning of something bigger. We need to move, Elliot said, his voice steady. The Council won't stop here. They'll come after us with everything they've got. Serena didn't argue. She didn't need to. She knew it, too. But for the first time, they both understood that they were in this together, bound by more than just the ancient law. They were partners now, united in a fight that neither of them had expected, but that they would face head-on. They turned and began walking, leaving the battlefield behind them. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and unknown challenges. But they had each other, and for now, that was enough. As they walked into the distance, the stars above them seemed to shine brighter, as if the universe itself was watching them, waiting to see how far their journey would take them. The bond between them was strong, and no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side.